Hello everybody and welcome back to another EDH gameplay here on this channel. Before we get into today's gameplay, I want to make a quick shout out to Kaiju Cards in Trier, Germany for providing a great place for us where we can play our TCGs. I'm back with my Aragorn the Uniter deck, trying to sling a few multicolored spells together to generate a lot of value. Julius is new to this channel and is playing as Yuriko Ninja's deck, trying to manipulate the top of his library to deal a bunch of damage with Yuriko's triggers. Christopher has brought back his Karona False God deck, which features a huge goat theme. Jonas is also new to this channel and has brought his Balan Wandering Knight mono-white Voltron deck, trying to win with commander damage. So I'd say let's jump right into the gameplay. I start us off by drawing for turn, playing a Canopy Vista as land for turn. I pass the turn, Julius untaps and draws. He plays a Drowned Catacombs as land for turn and passes the turn. Christopher draws for his turn. He plays a forest into a Soul Ring. He passes the turn. Jonas draws, he plays a Plains, taps 1 and casts a Bloodforged Battle Axe. Afterwards he passes the turn. I untap, draw for my turn, I play a Furycorn Snarl as land for turn tapped. I tap 1 and cast a Many Partings. I find an island to my hand and I create a food token. I pass the turn, so Julius untaps and draws. He plays a Swamp as land for turn, followed up by a Chrome Mox. He imprints a blue card, and he taps 3 mana to cast his commander, Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow. He passes the turn, so Christopher untaps and draws. He taps 1 mana to cast a Birds of Paradise. Afterwards he plays a Cascading Cataracts as land for turn and passes the turn. Jonas untaps and draws, plays a Plains as land for turn. He taps 2 to cast a Sword of the Animist. He passes the turn, so I untap, draw for my turn. I play the island and I tap a total of 3 mana to cast Shanna, Purifying Blade. I pass the turn. Julius untaps. He draws for his turn. He moves to combat and attacks Jonas with his commander. Jonas takes it and he has a Yuriko trigger. He hits a 1000-faced Shadow and puts it to hand while we all lose 1 life. In his second main phase, he casts the 1000-faced Shadow and passes the turn. Christopher untaps, he draws for his turn and passes the turn. Jonas untaps and draws, he plays a Plains as land for turn. He taps 2 to cast a Leonin Shikari, he passes the turn. I untap, draw for my turn. I play a Rogrim Triumph tapped and I move to combat. I attack Jonas with Shanna, so he takes 3. And I gain 3. In my second main phase I tap 2 mana to cast a Prismatic Omen. In my end step Shanna triggers, so I pay the 1 to draw a card. Julius untaps, draws for his turn. He moves to combat and he attacks me with 2 creatures. I take 2 damage, one of it is commander damage. And he has 2 Yuriko triggers. He hits a Swamp and he hits a Soul Ring. He puts those cards to his hand while we all take 1 damage. In his second main he plays a Swamp as land for turn. He taps it to cast a Soul Ring. Afterwards he taps 3 mana total, has 1 colorless floating for a Diabolic Intent. As additional cost he sacrifices his commander and finds a card to his hand. Afterwards he passes the turn, so Christopher draws for his turn and plays a Mystic Monastery as land for turn. He passes the turn, so Jonas untaps and draws, plays a Plains as land for turn. He taps 2 mana to equip the Sword of the Animist to Shikari. He moves to combat and attacks me. On attack he finds a Plains to the battlefield tapped, and afterwards I take 3 damage. Jonas passes the turn, so I untap, draw for my turn. I move to combat and I take Julius for 3. He takes it, so he loses 3 and I gain 3. And in my second main phase I tap a total of 4 mana to cast my commander, Aragorn the Uniter. Afterwards I play a Croson Verge as land for turn and I pass the turn. Julius untaps, draws for his turn. He moves to combat and attacks me in the air. Before damage he ninjutsus in his commander, Yuriko. And before damage Christopher Swords to Plowshares Yuriko. That happens, so Julius gains 1 life. Afterwards he casts a washout, naming the color green. So all green permanents are bounced to their owner's hand. Afterwards he passes the turn. Christopher untaps and draws. For 1 mana he recasts his Birds of Paradise. And afterwards he taps a total of 3 mana to cast a Propaganda. After that he passes the turn. Jonas untaps, draws for his turn. He taps 2 mana to equip his axe to his Shikari. He moves to combat and attacks Julius with his Shikari. Julius takes 5, and on attacks he finds another basic land to the field, and he taps 2 mana to cast a Mask of Everson. Afterwards he passes the turn, so I untap, draw for my turn. I tap a total of 3 mana to cast a Chromatic Lantern. Afterwards I play Mossfire Valley as land for turn, and then I pass the turn. Julius untaps and draws. He taps his Soaring for 2 colorless to cast a Brainstone, has 1 mana floating. He taps 2 additional to cast a Dorothy Voidwalker. In response to Dorothy I crack my Crowson Verge and I find 2 lands to the field. I find a Catria Triumph and an Idyllic Beachfront. Then Dorothy resolves. He taps an additional 1 mana to recast his Thousand-Faced Shadow, and then Julius passes the turn. Christopher untaps, he draws for his turn. He plays a land for turn, and he taps a total of 5 mana to use his Cascading Cataracts to generate 5 mana, and with his Birds of Paradise he casts his commander Karona, False God. He moves to combat and he attacks Jonas, naming Avatar on attack, so he takes 8 commander damage. After that he passes the turn. Julius untaps and draws for his turn. He pays 2 mana to equip his copy of the Battle Axe to Karona. He moves to combat and he attacks Christopher with his Shikari, and Karona goes at Julius. Both declare no blocks. On attacks he finds a basic land to the field. Julius takes 10 commander damage and Christopher takes 5 damage. This way he creates 2 more copies of his axe, which we will catch in a second. In his second main phase he taps 4 mana to cast a Day of Judgment. Julius counters it with an offer he can't refuse. Afterwards he passes the turn, so I untap. I draw for my turn. I play an exotic ore card as land for turn. I tap a total of 4 mana to recast my commander Aragorn. I tap an additional 3 to cast Shanna. On cast I create a human token, I give Karona +4/+4 and I scry 2. I put 1 on top and 1 on bottom. Tap an additional 2 mana to recast Prismatic Omen, trigger Aragorn, targeting Karona. Afterwards I move to combat and I attack Jonas, for definitely enough commander damage to knock him out of the game. Afterwards I pass the turn. Julius untaps, draws for his turn. He moves to combat and attacks me with everything. On attack he chooses Avatar, and before damage he ninjutsus in his commander, Yuriko. I take 8 damage from Karona, 1 damage from Yuriko and 1 damage from his Thousand-Faced Shadow. He has 2 Yuriko triggers, so he reveals a 4 CMC and a 1 CMC card, so we take a total of 5 damage. Takes the card to his hand, and in his second main phase he cracks his Brainstone. He rearranges the top 3 cards of his library. Afterwards he plays a Sunken Hollow as land for turn. And then he has to discard and discards his Dorothy Voidwalker. Christopher untaps, draws for his turn. He taps 2 mana to cast a Spectacular Showdown targeting Karona. It resolves, so she gets a double strike counter. He attacks Julius, and in response he casts Winds of Rebuke targeting Karona. It resolves, so she gets bounced back to his hand. We all have to mill the top 2 cards of our library. And afterwards he passes the turn. I untap, draw for my turn. I play a Restless Bivouac as land for turn. I tap 5 mana to cast a Kindred Discovery. On cast I scry 2 due to Aragorn, and I bottom both. Afterwards I move to combat and Shanna and Aragorn attack Julius. On attack I draw 2 cards from Kindred Discovery, and Julius takes the damage. I gain 3 life, and as I move to my end step, Shanna triggers, so I pay 1 mana to draw 1 card. Julius untaps, draws for his turn. He immediately moves to combat and the Thousand-Faced Shadow attacks me and Yuriko attacks Christopher. Here we sadly forget that he needs to pay for propaganda. We take our damage and he has 2 triggers from Yuriko. He reveals a total CMC of 2 mana, so we take 2 damage. In his second main phase he casts a Temporal Manipulation to take an extra turn after this one. He taps 2 mana to cast an Arcane Signet, and he uses that Arcane Signet to cast a Phyrexian and looks at the top 2 cards of his library. After that he tries to move to his extra turn, but Christopher has a response as he tries to Beast Within my Aragorn. In response to that I cast a Flawless Maneuver, which creates a human token due to Aragorn, and I also draw a card due to Kindred's Discovery. I get a Beast token as Beast Within still resolves, but I do have indestructible creatures. Julius untaps, draws for his turn. He plays an exotic ore card as land for turn. He cycles a Street Wraith by paying 2 life, so he draws a card. He taps 2 mana and casts a Sensei's Divining Top. For 1 mana, he casts a Scheming Symmetry targeting himself and Christopher. Both of them find 2 cards to the top of their library, and still with the 1 remaining mana floating, Julius rearranges the top cards of his library by using Sensei's Divining Top. He moves to combat, attacks me with 2 creatures, and Yuriko goes to Christopher. This time he remembers propaganda, and as we cannot declare any blockers, we take our damage. His first hit is a Temporal Trespass, so we take 11 damage. And his second hit is an island. He takes those cards to hand. And in his second main phase, he taps 3 mana and delves the remaining cards to cast Temporal Trespass. So he takes an extra turn after this one. He also casts a Gingerbread. After that he moves to his extra turn. He draws for turn. He plays a City of Brass as land for turn. He creates 2 mana and uses one of those to rearrange the top with his Sensei. And he uses the other one to make Gingerbread unblockable except by creatures with haste. 3 of his creatures attack me, and Yuriko attacks Christopher. He pays for the propaganda. As we cannot declare any blockers, he uses his ninjutsu ability to ninjutsu in a Shakashima student as a copy of Aragorn. We take our damage. And Christopher blocked with his Birds of Paradise. He has 2 Yuriko triggers and hits a total mana value of 3. So I go down to 1 and Christopher goes to 10. He casts a Phyrexia again. That triggers his Aragorn, so he scries 2 a total of 2 times. After that he passes the turn, and in Christopher's upkeep he uses the Sensei's Divining Top to draw a card. The card he reveals is a Temporal Mastery, so he casts it for its miracle cost, which means that after Christopher's turn he has his extra turn. Christopher draws for his turn. He taps a total of 5 mana, pumps it into his Cascading Cataracts to cast a Taunt from the Rampart. So each creature is goaded now and cannot block. Julius goes to his extra turn and draws. He plays an island as land for turn and casts a Consign targeting his Phyrexia. That triggers Aragorn, so he scries 2. It bounces back his Phyrexia. He recasts the Phyrexia, scrying 2 twice and rearranging the top cards. After that he casts a Baleful Strix, which also makes him scry 2 and lets him draw a card. He generates more mana to cast a Smoke Shroud enchanting Yuriko. He also uses more mana to make Gingerbread unblockable, and he attacks me with everything. On attack, he uses ninjutsu to ninjutsu in a moon circuit hacker. All those creatures connect, and so I die. He has 4 Yuriko triggers, but he draws first from the hacker. And afterwards he resolves trigger by trigger. He first hits a Limdul's Vault. So Christopher takes 2, he holds priority and casts Limdul's Vault to rearrange the top cards, but he scries 2 first. And afterwards he resolves more triggers, hitting a Time Warp and a Khan's Temporal Sunring, dealing enough damage to kill Christopher. Alright guys, this was another very exciting EDH gameplay here on this channel. When it comes to the combo of the game, I definitely want to mention how Julius decided to let his Sakashima student enter as a copy of Aragorn, which gave him a bunch of scry triggers after he did it. And another honorable mention definitely goes out to Phyrexia, which is just a very powerful card in a Yuriko deck. A 1 mana 1/1 with flying, and on ETB you can scry 2, is simply so much value, as you have seen in this game. Especially since Julius recast it over and over again to constantly arrange the top cards of his library. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about it. And then I would say, see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.